Hello you guys, welcome to today's lesson on graphing a line using the x and y intercepts. In today's lesson we are going to talk about what it means to be the x-intercept, what it means to be in y-intercept, what it means to be in standard form, what it means to be a line, what a vertical line is, what a horizontal line is, and then also what their equations look like. So as you go through this lesson video, make sure that you copy down all of these vocabulary words. You can push pause if you need to, and then push play when you're ready to move forward. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the x and y intercepts. Okay, so as we look at this coordinate plane I have over here, this line right here, this green line, that is the x-axis. Okay, remember the horizontal axis is the x-axis, and then the red line, that is the y-axis. The x-intercept is the point where the line crosses the x-axis. So that makes sense. The y-intercept is the point where the line crosses the y-axis. Okay, so if we look at this green line right here, our x-axis, we can see that this point right here is our x-intercept because that's the point where the line crosses through the x-axis. And the red line, that is our y-axis, and we can see that this point right here is the y-intercept because that's where the line crosses through the y-axis at. Now every line we can draw on the coordinate plane has a specific x-intercept and a specific y-intercept, unless it is a horizontal or vertical line, and then it will have either just an x-intercept or just a y-intercept. When we talk about lines, I know you guys have seen this definition of a line a number of times. We know that a line is straight, that it extends forever in both directions. It's made up of an infinite amount of points. In order to graph a line, we need to know at least 2 points the line passes through. And this is what we're going to be doing today. We are going to be graphing using the x and y intercepts, because if we have the x-intercept and the y-intercept, then that is going to give us at least 2 points that the line passes through. So let's go ahead and look at these graphs here that we have to the right. Graph number 1. Right here is our x-axis, and we can see that the line for graph 1 crosses through the x-axis at the point 6, 0. So the x-intercept of graph 1 is 6, 0. We can see that the y-intercept, so here's our y-axis, we can see that the y-intercept for graph 1 is 0, negative 10. Let's look at graph number 2. We can see this line is going up and to the right, and we can see that the x-intercept is to the right 10, up or down 0. Okay, so that's where that line crosses the y-axis at, right here. That's the x-intercept. And we can see that the y-intercept is at 0, negative 6. Let's look at graph number 3. On graph number 3, our line is moving up and to the right. Here's our x-axis. We can see that our x-intercept is to the right 8 and up or down 0. We can see that our y-intercept is 0, negative 6. And then let's go ahead and look at graph number 4. So here's our line. It crosses through the x-axis at 4, 0. And it crosses through the y-axis at 0, negative So what do you notice here? I want you to look at the x-intercept column. Is there anything that you can see that these points have in common? So all 4 of these points are an x-intercept. Can you see that the y-coordinate for each of these is 0? And what about for the y-intercept? What do you notice here? If you look at each of these points for the y-intercept, do you see that the x-coordinate is 0? You can see for our x-intercept, our y-coordinate is always 0. And for our y-intercept, the x-coordinate is always 0. Okay, so if a point is the x-intercept, the y-coordinate of the x-intercept is always going to be 0. If a point is the y-intercept, the x-coordinate is always going to be 0. Okay, so we are going to use this information right here to help us graph a line using the x and y-intercepts. Because if we find the x-intercept and we find the y-intercept, that will give us 2 points that are on our line, and we can graph those points and graph our line. So in order to graph a line using the x and y-intercepts, here are the 3 steps that we are going to follow. The first one is to put the equation in standard form. So let's just have a quick review of what that looks like. Okay, so remember that standard form is when we have our equation in the form of ax plus by equals c. So basically in standard form, we have our term that's just a constant on the right side. We have our x term and our y term on the left side. Okay, remember that the a and the b, those are just the coefficients of our term or terms, and the a or the b can be positive or negative. Okay, and then the c, when I say the term that's just a constant, that's our term that's just a number. So if I give you this equation, 3x minus 2y equals 6, this equation right here is in standard form. We would say that our a is 3, our b is negative 2, and our c is 6. And if we have an equation that's not in standard form, if we want to graph using the x and y intercepts, we put our equation in standard form first. So let me remind you what that looks like. So if you have this equation here, 4 times y equals 8 plus 2x, in order to put this in standard form, remember we have to have the x term on the left, the y term on the left, and then the constant term on the right. So as we look through our equation here, we have our y term on the left, so that's good. We have our constant on the right, so that's good. But this x term right here, we need it to be on the other side of the equation. And the only way that we can cancel this term off of the right side and bring it to the left side is by doing a negative 2x. Okay, if we do a negative 2x on the right side, that's going to cancel this off and leave us with 8. And remember, when you're solving an equation or manipulating an equation, whatever you do on one side, you've got to do the exact same thing on the other side. So now we have 4 times y minus 2x equals 8. And this is almost in standard form. We still need to switch these two terms around so that it's the x term first and then the y term. Notice that there is a minus sign in front of this 2x. So when we rearrange these, we have to keep that minus sign with the x. So negative 2x plus 4y equals 8. And now this equation is in standard form. Okay, so let's go ahead and try and graph a few lines using these three steps. Okay, so we're going to put our equation in standard form. We're going to let the x be 0 and solve for y. Okay, so we're basically just going to set up a table of values like we did in the last lesson, graphing using a table of values. And we are going to pick 0 for the x, we're going to pick 0 for the y, and then we're going to plug those into our linear equation and solve for the other coordinate. Okay, so let's just start with this one. X plus y equals -4. So let's set up our table of values here. This one is already in standard form. So we're just going to set up our table of values that are going to help us find 2 points that are on the line. And remember, you can graph a line if you know 2 points. And in fact, let me slide this over just a bit. Okay, so once our equation is already in standard form, we're going to let the x be 0, and we're going to solve for y. So let's take this equation, let's write it just like it is, but instead of that x, we're going to plug in 0. And if we let the x be 0, well, that means that our y is going to equal -4. Now let's let our y be 0 and solve for our x. So if we take this equation, we write it just like it is, except for instead of the y, we plug in 0. When our y is 0, our x will equal -4. Okay, so now our next step is to graph the line using the x and y intercepts. So we have a point at 0, -4. So that means to the right or left 0, and then down 4. That's 0, -4. And then -4, 0 would be to the right or left, -4, and then up or down 0. So once we have our 2 points, our x-intercept and our y-intercept, we can graph our line. So let's go ahead and look at another example. So remember, your steps are to make sure that your equation is in standard form first, which this one is. Then you are going to find the x-intercept and the y-intercept by letting the x be 0 and solve for the y, and let the y be 0 and solve for the x. So let's take this equation 3 times instead of the x. We're going to let that be a 0, and then we have a -y equals 9. So if we let the x be 0 here, 3 times 0 is 0. So then we have a -y equals 9. We're actually not done solving for the y yet. Because there is a negative sign in front of the y, that's like having a -1 times by y. So in order to get that y all by itself, we have to divide both sides by a -1. Okay? So when the x is 0, the y is -9. Now let's take this same equation and let's let the y be 0. So that's going to give us 3 times x minus 0 equals 9. 3 times x minus 0 equals 9 is going to leave us with 3 times x equals 9. And then we would have to divide by 3 on both sides to make this x equals 3. Okay, so now we have 2 points that are on this line. We know our x-intercept is 3, 0. And we know our y-intercept is 0, -9. Okay, so let's go ahead and plot these 2 points, and then we can graph our line. So the x-intercept crosses the line at 3, 0. And remember, this is our x-axis and this is our y-axis. And then the y-intercept crosses the line at 0, -9. Looks like I've ran out of space here on my coordinate plane, so this would be -7. Let's just draw a few more lines here. Okay, so we have -7, -8, this is 0, negative 9. Okay, voila. That is how we graph a line using the x and y intercepts. Let's look at a few more examples. Okay, so 3 times y minus 2x equals 18. This equation is almost in standard form. Remember, to be in standard form, you have the x term and then the y term equal to the constant term. So all we have to do here is switch these two guys around. Remember, when I rearrange these terms, this term is a negative because there's a minus sign in front of it. It makes it a negative. So when I rearrange these, we have to write it as negative 2x plus 3 times y equals 18. Now we are going to find the x-intercept and the y-intercept by letting our x be 0 and solve for the y, and letting our y be 0 and solve for the x. So let's take this equation, let's write it just like it is, but instead of that x, we're going to let that be 0. Okay. And whenever you are finding the x and the y intercepts, because you're letting one of the variables be 0, that term is just going to drop completely out. So negative 2 times 0, that's just a 0. So then we're left with 3 times y equals 18. And to get the y by itself, we divide by 3. So y equals 6. So when we let our x be 0, our y is 6. Okay, so let me review the steps. The first one is to put this equation into standard form. Because there's a negative sign in front of this, or a subtraction sign, it makes it a negative. So when we rearrange these terms so that we've got the x term and the y term equal to the constant, we have to make sure that we keep that negative sign with the 2x. Okay, now once our equation is in standard form, we are going to find our x and y intercepts by letting the x be 0 and solve for the y, and letting the y be 0 and solve for the x. So negative 2 times 0 plus 3y equals 18. And then we are going to negative 2 times 0 is 0, which leaves us with 3 times y equals 18. And then you divide by 3 on both sides. So the y equals 6. And if we want to find what the x-intercept is, we let the y be 0. And we solve for the x. So 3 times 0 is 0, which is going to leave us with negative 2 times x equals 18. And then we divide by negative 2. So x equals negative 9. Okay, so I know that my x-intercept is negative 9, 0. And I know that the y-intercept is 0, 6. So 0, 6, that's our y-intercept. Negative 9, 0, that's our x-intercept. Once we have plotted both of those points, we can graph our line. And let's go ahead and look at a couple more examples. Okay, so for this one, in order to put this in standard form, we're going to switch these around. At this point in the video, it would be really great if you guys push pause and try and do this one on your own, and then push play, and then you can see if you did it correctly. So when I switch those two around, we have negative 2x plus y equals 4. We're going to set up a table here. We're going to let the x be 0 and solve for the y, and let the y be 0 and solve for the x. So when I let the x be 0, my y is going to equal 4. When I let the y be 0, you can see that's going to leave us with just negative 2 times x equals 4. And then when we divide by negative 2 on both sides, 4 divided by negative 2 is negative 2. So now my y-intercept is at 0, 4, x-intercept is at negative 2, 0. And voila, there is our line. Okay, all of the ones that I have given you so far have already had the x term and the y term on the left side and the constant term on the right side. For question number 5, we need to switch this around a little bit so that it's in standard form. We can see that our constant term is on our right side and we have our x term on the left side, but we need to move this y term to the other side of the equation. So we're going to do that by subtracting 2y from both sides. The 2y subtract 2y here is going to cancel and leave us with negative 8. And then on the left side, we're going to have 4 times x minus 2 times y. So now once our equation's in standard form, we set up a table of values. We let the x be 0 and solve for the y. We let the y be 0 and solve for the x. So when I let the x be 0, that just wipes out this term, right? It's going to totally wipe out this term. And then we'll have negative 2 times y equals negative 8. So we divide by negative 2 on both sides, and y equals 4. Okay, and then let's go ahead and take this same equation, only this time we're going to let the y be 0. So we have 4x minus 2y equals negative 8. This time we're going to let the y be 0. So 4 times x minus 2 times 0 equals negative 8. And the negative 2 times 0 right here, that 0, when you multiply something by 0, it's going to totally wipe this term out. So now we just have 4 times x equals negative 8. We divide by negative 4 on both sides. X equals negative 2. So 0, 4 is right here. Negative 2, 0 is right here. And here is our line. Now the next 2 examples deal with a vertical line and a horizontal line. Remember, when you are graphing a line that just has an x, this line is only going to cross through the x-axis. Okay, so if we go to x equals negative 3, that's right here. Okay, so our x-intercept is going to be negative 3. So if we were to let our x be 0 and solve for our y, well, if we let our x be 0 in this equation, it's not true, right? So we can't do that, and that's because this line doesn't cross the y-intercept ever. If we let our y be 0 and solve for the x, we're going to get negative 3, 0, okay? And then we know that our x is always going to be negative 3. So the place on the coordinate plane where the x-axis is negative 3 would be this vertical line right here. X equals negative 3. Okay? So you have to remember that whenever you have an equation that just has an x, it's only going to cross through the x-axis, and that will be a vertical line. Okay, so a vertical line is always going to have an x equals equation. And then a horizontal line is always going to have a y equals equation. Okay, so when we do y equals 2, well, that line crosses through the y-axis at 2. And this line right here, that is where the y coordinate is always 2. Okay, so an x equals equation, that is going to give us a vertical line. Okay, crossing only through the x-axis. And a y equals equation is going to give us a horizontal line crossing through only the y-axis. Okay, so let's just review our lesson vocabulary. Make sure that you guys understand each of these words, and then it will be quiz time. So the x-intercept, that's the place where the line crosses through the x-axis. The y-intercept is the place where the line crosses through the y-axis. Standard form is a times x plus b times y equals c. And this is the form that we put our equation in when we want to graph using the x and y intercepts. We know that in order to graph a line, we need to know at least 2 points. And for this particular lesson, the 2 points that we are finding are the x-intercept and the y-intercept. To find the x-intercept, we let the y be 0 and solve for the x. And to find the y-intercept, we let the x be 0 and we solve for the y. Okay? Vertical line, we know that it's going to have an x equals equation, and it will only ever have an x-intercept. And a horizontal line is going to have a y equals equation, and it will only ever cross through the y-axis. Okay, so here is your quiz. You need to graph each line using the x and y intercepts. So remember, you're first going to put your equation in standard form, which I was really nice. I gave you equations that are already in standard form. And then you are going to find the x-intercept by letting the y-coordinate be 0 and solve for the x. And you are going to find the y-intercept by letting your x-coordinate be 0 and solve for the y. Okay, there is graph paper you can use in the course content under course material. If you still do not know how to do this lesson, please come to class or math lab or call us or text us or email us. We're here to help you. Have a great day.